It is now time to move on to the next exercise. The next exercise is found on page 11 of the guide, and we will be creating an animation in this exercise. So just to recap, in the folder you download from Brixis 24/7, you will have the folder called 14_animation editor. And here you will find the starter file called rotary platform assembly. Now, creating assemblies or creating animations in BricsCAD Mechanical can for some be a very technical topic, and it can be unintuitive if you are not used to this way of creating animations. So I suggest you pay attention to my explanation and the steps I take to go through it. And then you will be able to try it for yourself later in the breakout room, as with the previous exercise. So once again, we will be working with an assembly. This assembly has a very specific mechanism here this part is controlled by a motor on the underside of this assembly, which will cause it to spin. The pin that you can see here will then interlock with the gaps and slots in this star-shaped part, which will then in turn cause it to rotate. And the goal of the animation is to highlight this function and the assembly and how the part is also assembled. So assemblies or animations in BricsCAD needs a underlying set of parameters to control the actions that will be shown in the animation. And the animation editor panel that we will be working with is where we will manipulate these underlying parameters to create the movements and the animation that we wish to have. So on the left side of my screen, you can see the mechanical browser. Here we have some pre-made parameters and some constraints. We don't have to worry about the two top parameters. We will be using, however, the RA parameter. This is what controls the rotational movement of this mechanism. Here we have some parameters that are created to calculate the specific rotation and the rotational properties of the RA parameter. We also have a parameter called transparent cover. The use of this will become more apparent later in the animation exercise. But basically, this controls the visibility of a panel that goes over this mechanism, and then turning it transparent later on will help to show the how the mechanism works during the animation. We also have a parameter to control the visibility of an exploded view. And this exploded view is similar to the one from before. Here in the same file we have, or in this file, we have also created an automatic bottom explosion. And this, as you can see earlier, it had a certain amount of steps in the last exercise. The same we will see here when we then use this automatic bottom exploded view to create and incorporate in the animation. So to start working and to create an animation, we can go to the top of the screen on the ribbon under the view section. Here you can see the yellow play button called the animation editor. And this will open a animation panel. By default, it should appear on the bottom of your screen. And this is where we will be manipulating and creating timelines to interact with these parameters. On the left side of the panel, you can see there are some drop-down menus. There is a way or option to create various scenes for your animations. In this scenario, we won't be using this. We will only be working in this one scene. Underneath it is another drop-down menu. Here is where you can access the parameters in the file. So you can see the parameters in the mechanical browser are the same ones that you will find here, as well as the automatic bottom exploded view. Once these objects or these parameters are added to the animation, you will see them appear underneath this camera effect here, or this camera timeline. So I will just go ahead and add, let's see, add the automatic bottom one. Then you can see it appeared underneath the camera, and it has a new timeline of its own. So when you, or to add these effects, you need to select them in the drop-down menu, then select the blue plus sign, and they will be added to the, or be given a timeline in the animation. From there, we will be using this white plus sign to add effects onto the timelines. And once we have these effects, we can then manipulate the settings. So what you can see, the lines here, the line with the numbers as well, is what you will see me refer to as the timeline. And on the right side, you can see this square that we call the, and will be called the property bar. This property bar is where you will be able to change the settings of the different sequences and effects in the animation. And as we select different effects, you will see you will have more options in this property bar. Actually, first of all, I'm also going to undo this, and then I will change the scene duration from 1 second to 15 seconds. You can see currently the timeline only goes from 0 seconds to 1 second. If I change it to 15, you will see the timeline has now more timestamps, reaching all the way up to 15 seconds, which is more appropriate for the animation. Then I will add the automatic bottom parameter as well as the show exploded view. And now we have a timeline for the camera, the automatic bottom, and the exploded view. To start off, I'm going to add an effect for the show exploded view. This basically only shows or will control the visibility of the exploded view. So I will select the add an effect option, so the plus sign, and there you can see a little blue bar appear on the timeline for this parameter. When it is blue, it is selected, and you can then change the properties of it in the property bar. If it is gray, that means it is not selected and you have something else selected. So be aware of that. So since it is selected now, I will go to the properties bar on the right. And here you can see settings for the sequence and settings relating to the parameter and the value of the parameter. So the start time is currently set to 0 seconds, which is what I want. And the end time I will set to 10 seconds. And then you can see the bar on the timeline reach out and expand according to the top bar where you can see the numbering and the timestamps. Then I will add an effect for the automatic bottom ones. There you can see now the bottom part is, or the bottom bar is now grayed out, and the topper or upper effect for the exploded view is now blue. So now we have some different settings in the property bar. We still have settings for the sequence. This also starts at 0 seconds, which is what we want, and I will set the end time to 4 seconds. and you can see it adapt on the timeline. And in addition to this, instead of the property values or parameter values, you now have exploded view values that you can alter. So since it is an exploded view, it consists of steps as the last exercise. And here we can select what the first step of this sequence should be and what the last step should be, meaning that it will start from a specific step and then work its way to the last step. For this, I want it to be completely exploded and then slowly assemble itself. So then it would make sense to start from the most exploded step, which is the last step. So step 44 will be the first step. And then I want it to partially assemble itself. So I will make it assemble itself until it reaches step 22 for this sequence. Then next up, I also want to add, or we can actually move the cursor now, and we can see as we move our cursor throughout the timeline, just by clicking on the numbered timeline, you can see the model changing and the value of the exploded view changing. So you can see it going from almost completely exploded to slowly assembling itself. Then we want to add another effect for the automatic bottom one. For this, we can select it so it is highlighted and then change the value in the property bar. So start and change the start time from to just after the previous one. But we can also click and drag the bar itself. So just selecting the side of it and dragging it until it clashes with the previous effect. And then you can see the start time will also adapt in the property bar. And it is now showing that it's starting at 4.01 seconds, just after the previous effect. And then I can give it an end time. You can drag it until 10 seconds, but we can also type in the value 10 seconds as the end time. And then from here, we want to again start from step 44. So again, starting from completely assembled, but this time going to completely assembled as well. So the first exploded effect, we wanted to partially assemble. This is because we want it to partially assemble from a certain camera angle and then have another sequence from a different camera angle where it goes from exploded to fully assembled. It can be a bit difficult to see how it is connected at this point, but it will make more sense as we go along and can start playing the assembly or the animation, I mean. So now we can add a camera effect. So to add a camera effect, you can, or when adding a camera effect, it will be given the camera angle of the current view in the model space. So I will go to now the top right of my model space where I can see the look from tool. And here I will select the top front right viewpoint. So now if I add a camera effect, then this will be the camera positioning of this camera effect. So I will press the add an effect option for the camera. It will be placed at my cursor, but I will change the start time from 0 seconds until 4 seconds. So now this camera angle will overlap with the first sequence of the explosion. Then I will add a second camera effect. starting from right after the first camera effect and then reaching on until 10 seconds. So now we have one camera angle or one camera sequence for the first part and one camera angle or camera sequence for the second part of the explosion. Now, currently the two camera effects have the same camera angle as they were both created while I was viewing the model in the same way. To change this, you can create a new or change the camera angle and add a new camera effect, or you can even change the camera points and so on. I will show that now. If you open the layers panel, you can see that there is a layer called animation paths. This path has been created, or this layer has been created so that we can have a animation path, meaning that we have a line that the camera can move along throughout the animation. It is currently frozen, as you can see by the frozen or the snowflake symbol. If I select this, you can see if I select or zoom out a bit in my model, you can see that this arc and this line is what was hidden in this layer. And this is what we will use as our camera movement path. So to add this as a camera path, we can go to or select the second camera sequence. And then in the property bar, you can see there is a setting called camera or a section called camera. It is currently set to point in camera path type. In the drop-down menu, we can set it to path. And now it says that the camera path is undefined. So here you can see an option to select new path. If you select this option, you can then select the arc and be prompted with this window to give it a name. I will just accept the default name. And now that arc is our camera path. Now we also need to select a fixation point of the camera, a point that the camera will be pointing towards through the animation sequence. So camera path type or target path type, we will keep to point, and the target point we can set here by again selecting the point. We can manually select a point in the model itself, but we can also type it into the command line. I will type 0, 0, 0, and again be prompted with a name for this. I will accept the default one. And now the target point is set as the origin point of this model. So now we can go through the timeline by clicking on the timestamps. You can see we have this static camera view on this part of the sequence for the first camera sequence. As soon as we reach the second camera sequence, you can see that the camera will move around in the model space according to the camera path. And since we set the exploded view to fully assemble by selecting the step 0 as the last step, you can see that it is assembling further than the previous explosion sequence. So next up for step 39, we will add a new effect for the show exploded view. So in the show exploded view timeline, we can double click the timeline to add a new effect. Here we will set the start time just after the previous one, or just after the previous one, and the end time will be 15 seconds. So the end, until the end of the scene that we have created. And the start value will be 0 and the end value will be 0 to control the visibility of the exploded view. Next up, I will add a timeline for the RA parameter, which is the rotation of the parts. Here I will then select to add an effect from 10 seconds until 15 seconds. The start value can be 0, meaning that it is the default position of the parameter. But since we want it to rotate, we can give it a high end value, for example, 1,800, which will make it keep rotating. Now we can try to change our cursor position. And as you can see in the new sequence we now created, we created a sequence that will show the exploded view fully assembled. And we created the RA sequence, which will rotate the parts. And so when we go through the time stamps, you can see the part rotating and changing positions. Now here you will see that the the cover here is covering up some of the internal parts, which is not what we want. We want them to be visible. So I will then go ahead and add an effect for the transparent cover, or add a timeline, I mean. Then we will add an effect from 10 seconds until 12 seconds first, and give it a value of 0 as a start and end value. And then add a second sequence from just after 12 seconds until 15 seconds. So for the rest of the time, with a value of 2. So these parameters will now change the visibility of the cover, or should. So here you can see if there's a rotating and the cover is visible. Once we reach the second sequence for this, you can see the panel disappears and it will keep rotating to show the internals of the mechanism. Now, I also want to add a camera effect for this sequence. So I will go ahead and select the top front right viewpoint. I will add a camera effect going from just after 10 seconds until the end of the animation, so until 15 seconds. And then I will again add a path to this, same as before, selecting the camera path type as path and defining a path. This time I will select this remaining line of the animation paths layer. Again, accept the default names. Then again, like before, select the target path point and set it again to 0, 0, 0. Select the default value. And now the last camera sequence, the third camera sequence will follow this line here. So then we can give it a try to move this camera around, or this timeline. And it looks good to me. So you can also see there are some media controls on the panel. If you press the stop button now, you will be taken back to the beginning. And you can then press the play button and you can see the animation play out that I have created. Now, this is not actually a movie or a video. This is a real-time calculation of the parameters. So that is why certain parts such as this can be a bit choppy. That is because it is very parameter intensive. And so it is, like I said, it is not an actual video. It is a live calculation of the parameters.